In my research in Thailand, I was conducting research on statelessness, which is the lack of citizenship anywhere in the world. And I was interviewing people who live in remote villages at the Thai-Burma border. And we conducted in-depth interviews at the beginning of the research because we wanted to make sure that subsequent focus groups and survey work that we did was very well informed. So we used the interviews in order to frame the rest of the research. We used it in this exploratory way. And we had very open-ended questions. Often an in-depth interview is something that you do with somebody on their terms so that they're most comfortable. And when you do this, when you do in-depth interviews in certain communities, that includes a lot of drinking. And the more in-depth they get, the more heavily intoxicated they get. So I have done a number of interviews with people who have gone completely off the rails and no longer make any sense whatsoever, and you can't keep them on track. So that has happened. I've done a key informant interview with an official who I knew to be corrupt when I went into the interview, and I basically had to maintain a sort of positionality of objectivity and curiosity and pretend as if I don't know what's really going on, because I had been doing all of these in-depth interviews with villagers around the community, and it took me a very long time to get a key informant interview with the district official. By the time I got this interview with the district official, I knew all these terrible things about him and had triangulated that information across a number of people. So it wasn't one disgruntled villager who told me that he just wouldn't sign. It was a number of people saying that this guy was asking for money and was quite corrupt. I did a great key informant interview with him where I was able to ask a number of questions, get his answers to things, and the whole time knew that what he was telling me was totally lying. So it was this in-depth interview that went very well according to all of the checklist, and yet I had to use the information across in-depth interviews and key informant interviews to understand that the content of this interview was useful only in the sense that it exposed further the extent of his corruption. But it does bring up the question of how do you use the information from in-depth interviews? This depends on your discipline. If you're coming from a discipline that is more post-positivist, public health, some lines of sociology, and economics, political science, you would think about information from each in-depth interview as analytically equal, such that the answers given by one student would be given the same analytical weight as the answer from another student and another student. If you're from a more critical discipline like anthropology or some lines of sociology, you can use your most revealing interview as the anchor interview and then give that the most weight, and other interviews can either support or refute that information. After you think about how you're going to weigh your interviews against one another or read them with each other, essentially you're thinking about how do the stories that people tell you work together to tell a broader story. So do they align around your research question? Do the stories have similar patterns? Are there themes that emerge that seem very similar? Do they contrast in their telling of a particular story? And why? When you have interviews and interviewees who tell you different stories about the same questions, the sub-question you want to ask yourself is what's going on? Is that because, for instance, they have different power relative to the question? Are they white? Are they non-white? Are they male, female, transgender? What are the issues that would explain why two different people have different experiences with respect to your research question? So this is when analysis of your interviews becomes really important. Actually, the same applies to similarity. So if you would expect that people of different genders or races or ages would have different experiences with respect to your question, but in fact you see similarities, the analytical work comes into asking why. Why are they similar?